So, a few weeks ago, Texas was proudly reopening their state. Everything was quote unquote going back to normal. It was over this whole coronavirus thing. It was
We're done.
rated. It wasn't a big deal anymore.
Coronavirus got canceled.
Right. And, so Texas was like, whatever, we don't need to worry about that anymore. And so they reopened the state, they reopened the government, they got everything quote unquote back on track. And now today it's like 4 weeks later after they quote unquote reopened, and Texas is reclosing. That's right,
I can't
folks.
believe this happened.
How could it be?
What happened?
It's so funny because everyone literally said, hey, this is what's gonna happen if y'all insist on trying to reopen your states with no clear plan, and with nothing has really changed. That was the real problem, is nothing had really changed or improved significantly. And they were like, oh, we're going to reopen anyway. And now a number of Texas hospitals are completely full. Like, there is no room at the inn, like every bed has like a dang corona patient in it. So, also Charlie Winters is joining us. I think she's still having trouble with her camera, but Charlie, can you
Hi.
hear us?
Hi, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Charlie.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'm going to keep screwing with the camera, but here we are.
Charlie Winters, friend of the show. Always good to have you around.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. We're just talking about the fact that Texas is reclosing.
Oh, really?
What? This happened? No way.
Yeah, Texas, I don't know if it was the governor or if it was some other entity. I can't remember, honestly. I'm tired of shit today. I got up really early and debated an Italian fascist in a banana costume, but we can talk more about that in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. We want to know more about this in a minute.
So Texas, I don't know, like I said, I don't know if it was the governor or somebody else, but they declared today that, hey, bars are closed again, restaurants are reducing capacity again. Like, a lot of the stuff that they just said that, it was over, they didn't need to do it, is all coming back in Texas, the great state of Texas.
Say, as someone in Colorado whose governor just reopened absolutely everything, I assume we're only a couple weeks behind this because, fuck, stores are just losing their entire staff to Corona out here.
What we have going on in Georgia, on the other hand, is Brian Kemp was the first person to open it back up again of anybody, and it was way too early, and it was like 2 weeks into the crisis. He just decided, oh, fuck it, we're open again. And there's a lot of complicated reasons behind that boil down to Republicans have been in control for decades, right? But now we have people who are just dying, and they're just releasing like really misleading graphs, and there's just this like entire like pushing back against actual numbers by saying like, oh no, it's not really that bad. They're making it look worse than it is. And it's like, no, people are just dying now. So it isn't quite bad that everything's collapsed yet, but we've also had kind of bigger problems as riots are burning down the city. So
right.
It's bad. Things are bad.
Yeah. So it's just so funny because, again, like everyone knew that this was going to happen with these states. And like you say, Charlie, my governor also, like, we are phase 1 reopening now, and like a couple weeks ago, it was the funniest thing because the state kind of leaked a plan here. I live in New Mexico, for those watching who don't know. The state kind of leaked a plan here about like what was maybe going to happen with the schools, or like some of the other like stuff that's going on. And like then cases spiked in Arizona, and they came out and they were like, that was actually a preliminary plan. That wasn't the we're not like just fumbling over themselves to walk back the idea that they were about to reopen everything because the state right next to us is fucking on fire,
Yeah. Well, I think on fire is kind of just the broad theme of the country right now. Because any minute now, of course, California is going to catch on fire again, and we'll just have wildfires burning all over the country too. Metaphorically, literally, psychologically, existentially, everything is burning down. grow food.
California is never not on fire, so that's just the state of things now.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing is like it's just things keep getting worse and worse and worse. And it's like at some point something's got to fucking give, right? Like surely we are not going to just like calmly line up and be slaughtered, right?
Yeah.
But you know, and I say this, but then again, the Holocaust happened, so I love you, Brandon. I miss you.
This background is perfect. I don't know how much more there is to say about Texas being fucking stupid. It's just kind of hilarious in a way. It's also really sad. It's like, to be clear, like it's funny in a dark way, but it's also really sad. I mean, these medical systems are getting overwhelmed, which is exactly what we warned everyone would happen if we did not do things to control this. So I don't know. Y'all got anything else to say about Texas?
Well, I'd say just on the thing that you were saying, that Rachel was saying a minute ago, about schools, whoever was talking about it. In our state, they've basically proposed in a number of school districts that the teachers are being given the option to either go back to school next year when the school is just reopening apparently, or they're being given an option to just take a year off without pay, and
so they don't get paid.
But
they don't have to die either. It's basically you starve or you die.
Starve or die is a nice choice.
Die or you die.
Everybody wants that choice.
To die?
Yeah, die or die.
That's decidedly a millennial choice, yeah.
It's weird. I mean, we're having some kind of similar problems. In fact, what I'm really worried about here is that they seem to be kind of like taking advantage of the COVID confusion to sort of like further stratify the classishness of schools in general, because they're like talking about, oh, reopening schools at such and such a capacity. Who is allowed? Which kids are being allowed to go back to physical school, right? Like,
well, not just that, but like under what circumstances? A lot of schools offering remote learning, but you have to have the fucking internet to do remote learning. So who really gets to be safe here?
I will give a tiny amount of credit to the school district here. They did come up with a non-internet way to do the remote learning, and it sucks, and everyone hates it. So
doing it.
They are like broadcasting some stuff on like a local TV station, and then sending you like packets of stuff at the beginning of the week to go with the broadcast, and everyone just hates it. It's the worst. Nobody's happy. Everyone is sad.
And you still have to have at least a TV to do it. So
right. I mean, yeah. So it's like it's still asking that people have access to things that not everybody necessarily has access to or has access to all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of kids in poverty, they live between two households, right? Between like two divorced parents, and one of those parents might live at a much lower standard than the other, and that's something that like affects a lot of these kids when we're talking about this stuff. Like they might have internet access at mom's house, but not at dad's, and like
and then
right, like
time, do they like just not do schoolwork half the time? What choice are we gonna make? Do we send them to school? Do they get sick?
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad news all the way around. So like there's no clear plan, and the teachers are miserable, the students are miserable. It's a mess. And
my friends who are college professors are absolutely panicking. One of them recently, who is particularly stellar, her name's Mandy Berry, was posting about how there just is no plan at all.
Yeah.
For reopening the university she teaches at. Like, there's no plan. They're just going to figure it out as they go along, and if people die,
Well, and that's kind of what they're saying here too, right? Like they kind of like rolled out this obviously bad plan and sort of tested it, and everyone was like, whoa, that's not going to work. Look at Arizona and Texas. And then the government was like, okay, that was just a joke, basically. It was a prank. But what is the plan? And people are kind of asking, what is the plan? And like, the state government is kind of like, we'll tell you later.
There will be a plan.
Yeah.
But I mean, the other side of that is like, what are we going to do? Like, what can we do to help young people who need to learn. You know, how are we going to move forward as a society when we can't really gather anymore?
Yeah.
You know, and what do we do with that fundamental and essential change? And the truth of it is, like, I don't have good answers for that. But all of it, I can say for sure, is compounded by the fact that like 30% of people are just pretending it's not happening at all.
Right. And I think that what are we going to do is also like, it's what are we going to do about COVID, right? Like, because the thing is that when this started out, there was kind of some hope that maybe we'll find a effective drug right away, or maybe like a vaccine won't be far down the road or something like that, you know, that some kind of like medical savior was sort of going to like be brought into the equation, you know, some crack team of scientists would, you know, sit down in the lab and figure it out. That hasn't happened. And in fact, like so far, everyone's kind of saying, gosh, this is going to be harder than we thought. Developing a COVID drug, developing a COVID vaccine, like these things have not gone well so far. And everyone seems to be kind of saying like, you know, hurry up and wait. So it's like, you know, HEAL Team 6. Exactly. Yeah, HEAL Team 6 in the lab.
The United States has finally been faced with a problem it cannot bomb, right? And therefore we have no solutions to it, flatly. We no longer have any infrastructure of any kind to take care of people. We only know how to destroy things. And we're just not prepared. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the resources devoted in the right directions. We don't have general security among the people. Like, we're just reaping the direct consequences of austerity politics for the last several decades.
And, you know, when people talk about like national security, like if that's your number one issue, you should still get it together on this, because like the idea has become that like national security just means more and more money into the budget. Well, it is a threat to our national security and stability to have COVID-19 wreaking havoc over our country while we just sort of stand around like, I wish we could do something about it.
Yeah, there's very much that sort of just like everybody's waiting for somebody to step up and be the leader, you know? And I mean, I don't think
Charlie returns.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you. You may have witnessed the end of my desktop computer forever. I'm on my laptop. Should be fine.
Oh,
What?
God.
Welcome
For
back.
real?
Thank you.
I hope your computer's okay.
It won't boot, but we'll see what happens later.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
I know those feels. Yeah, so we were just continuing to talk about the desperation of COVID-19, but now that you're back especially, I would love to talk about my weird experience this morning debating the Italian fascists. So this is one of those things where like I would love to hear how y'all feel about this, because this is an issue that I'm personally conflicted on, but like I don't always feel like there's any worth to debating people that are conservative, but sometimes I do feel like there can be a value to it. And in this particular case, it was like I was invited on this show that is meant to have like left-right debates, and I thought, fuck it, like maybe I'll do it. It ended up being like a lot weirder in a lot of ways than I initially expected when I kind of signed up. I did not expect to debate someone who literally, I'm not just like calling him a fascist as like an insult or something. Like he literally describes himself as a neo-fascist. And so I was like, oh, that's
Okay.
that's how it's going to be,
I mean, that's genuine commitment to left-right debate, I guess.
I guess.
Yeah. Can I swear on stream?
Yes.
Is that a thing? I don't know what TOS is.
It's fine.
Okay.
I don't know. Like well, okay. So the funny thing about this ultimately was that he really wasn't as extreme as I expected for someone who self-described as a fascist. Like I've debated a lot of right-wing Americans that are like so much more out there and wild, and this guy was kind of like surprisingly not as like, he didn't get me as riled up as I expected. But it was still like, I don't know, it was a really weird time. And I wore a banana suit the whole time. The suit's behind me still right now. I've got it right here. But I thought that would be just like a fun thing. I've been wearing the banana suit on some of our streams, and you know, it brings in viewers. So I thought, hey, maybe I'll do this show a favor. and wear the banana suit, and I had no other motives.
So what? When you say it was weird, what do you mean they were like more reasonable than you expected? Because fascism is definitely a very out there ideology. Do you mean like they were doing the weird like, oh, I'm a classical liberal, like I'm going to take these words and just berate them into their literal meaning?
No, it was like the opposite. Like he was like, I am a neo-fascist. Like he kept saying, like emphasizing like things about that and like how he liked authoritarian governments. But then at the same time, like every time we would get into like a particular subject, like the moderator asked us about like the anti-police riots, and I went on a very passionate rant because I got to start that one about, you know, that the government had to listen to us, period.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that like, you know, it like this stuff had gone on too far, and it was like you know, just like all this stuff, and it goes over to him, and he's like, well, I kind of agree. And it's just like, what? Like, you agree? Like, you're an authoritarian. Why are you agreeing with me that we should, you know, have these anti-police protests? And so like, and then he disagreed with some specific points, but it was like, he kept like broadly agreeing with me on subjects that you just don't expect someone that calls himself a fascist to agree upon. And the funniest part was, I really went into this thinking, I'll never change this person's mind about anything. This is about the audience, you know, this is about the people who will come watch, who, you know, support this channel, support this show,
right.
You know, blah, blah. Like, this is, you know, anything that I say is for their sake, right? But by the end of the show, he was kind of like, you're not the worst leftist I've met. You said the Zapatistas influence you, I'll research them. And I was like, please do. Like,
okay.
You know, like, great, you know? But it was like, just so bizarre.
Are they... that's a tough one, because I'm wondering, like, okay, so is this person identifying as a fascist because they've basically never encountered leftism outside of the concept that like Fox News pushes, that like Pelosi is as left as it gets and they're actually all globalists? Or is this like, are they... See, this is what's so hard about talking to like fascists, because of the like extended universe they're steeped in. I'm thinking like, oh, is this person trying to present fascism as like reasonable and research oriented?
Right.
Because that's a way to because like if fascism is being presented as a reasonable thing that can do research and understand things, like, oh, well, we're all against police, and it's like, well, okay, so like, who is the strong man that you're looking for then, and who are the arms of the strong man? Because, you know, fascism, if it's not the police, are they just trying to elide the fact that they're like, oh no, I'm into constitutional sheriffs, there should be one guy in each city who gets to decide what the law is? Like, where are they going with that? I didn't watch this debate, so I don't know, but
it honestly seemed like, I mean, I know exactly what you're describing, and I've seen it many, many times. And it honestly seemed like this guy was just more he seemed authentic about everything he was saying, in terms of like, he didn't seem to be lying when he was giving ground. He just seemed to have like this really bizarre set of views that, like, I don't know, part of why this whole thing was really interesting is because he's this European right winger. And like, I think we've gotten really used to like the idea of like the right wing presenting itself in a certain way in America, and like it was just weird to see like a really different presentation of the right wing. And again, this isn't like, oh, I thought it was really cool, I liked what he was saying, or any of that. I mean, I disagreed with virtually everything that he said during the debate, and let him know that. But it was just like, yeah, Brandon watched it, and so Brandon's got this is the perfect comment to sum it up for.
Okay, thank you.
4D chess guy. This was the Jeb Bush guy. Like,
okay,
that's literally what it felt like. It was just really funny because this is what's considered relatively far right by like the standards where he lives, but really it felt like just talking to like a normal American conservative, just like an average Republican voter.
Okay. So this is like I am authoritarian. Authority. I believe in the presence of an authority figure, and my entire conservative ideology therefore flows from it.
Kinda, yeah. It was really weird. It was bizarre shit.
Well, it's like what I want to know is what is the neo doing for neo-fascism? What is their functional understanding of fascism versus neo-fascism then if they're a neo-fascist?
I literally ended this debate by saying, you don't really come across as what I would generally consider to be a fascist. When you said that, it shocked me initially, but having talked to you, you sound more like a typical conservative. And in fact, the fascists here would not have you, is what I told him. And he seemed a little put off by that, but like, I literally said, I said, if it was me, I would choose any other political label. You know, like, cause like when you say fascist, everyone is immediately going to think the worst possible things. And it's like, I would just not use that label for any reason. That was my final take, was just like, just don't, why are you saying this?
Just for attention is what it sounds like.
That's a very good point.
I mean, I will say props to the guy for being respectful to me during the debate. At least he heard me out. You know, I've debated with a lot of people that don't. Maybe he really will like look into some of this stuff, and I don't know. Like,
I mean,
I don't know. I like I said, I didn't expect to change his mind, because you never expect that in a debate. But like, he was like, "Oh, maybe I'll check out the Zapatistas." I was like, "What?"
yeah. Well,
really
I mean,
please.
okay, so maybe you have just shown it, like, because you started this whole thing with the question, like, is it a good idea to debate people? And it's like, yeah, maybe like if you can find more small potatoes debates instead of like, because anyone who's popular on Twitter and has a huge online presence is in it for clout and specifically push the ideology. And the easiest way to do that is to pretend like they're debating. Whereas like, I bet you there's a million small potatoes debates. Like if I just like, like something that happens whenever I go out to one of the, like, I don't go out to bars much, but whenever I go out to the queer bar here in Denver, I almost always meet like queer right wingers and then end up debating them in a corner all night. That's happened the last like 4 times I've been out there.
Mm-hmm.
And every single time you do like a small potatoes in-person debate with someone who's just like, no, but if you read history, you're going to agree with me. And I'm like, no, I think if you read history, you might agree with me. But let's talk about that. I don't know. I feel like that actually is effective. And I don't know if there's a way to know before you go on a show whether or not it's going to be that, but I feel like you just got one of those.
I know, Rachel, what do you think about debating people on the other side? Like, when do you think it's worth it or not? Is there a time?
Well, okay, so we know from the available like data that people who are being confronted about their ideas are most likely, statistically speaking, to leave that argument feeling more certain that they were correct, right? And a lot of that is because, thank you, Brandon, I do hear enough male opinions. Let me put this up here, right there. I don't want to hear men at all. No, so we know, like, statistically speaking, people are most likely to leave a debate all the more convinced they're correct. And a lot of that is because when they are debating, they are rehearsing their talking points, right? So for them, they're just digging these grooves in deeper. The chance you do have is to reach people who are undecided. And if you are reasonably confident that you can make a better argument, a more logical argument, and a funnier and more charismatic argument than the other person, then you absolutely should do the debate, because people will be attracted to, you know, your looks, your personality, these things about you that make you likable. Right. As much or more than, you know, the actual logical arguments themselves. It's a matter of, can you, by participating in this debate, make undecided people feel better about you than they do about the other guy? And in that case, if you think you can, yeah, do it. Go ahead.
Well, it makes me feel better about it, because I honestly had mixed feelings about the whole experience, in terms of like, I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing the whole time. And especially like, I mean, when I initially signed up, I didn't know who I would be debating. And then when I heard that like this guy is literally a neo-fascist, I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to do this. But then actually doing it, I don't know. It did go better than I thought. It did seem more productive than I thought it might be. I don't know. I mean, I do feel confident in my personal ability to like stand firm in my beliefs and express them. And I felt like I did a very good job of doing that throughout. And like that, I definitely didn't let him just get away with saying everything that he wanted. And that I like picked some battles and kind of like, pressed him on some topics to try to like really like expose, like, is there something that makes sense in what he's saying, or does what he's saying not make sense, you know, and like try to like kind of, you know, push that ball forward. I don't know. It's very strange. But yeah, I think I did an okay job of representing. So with that in mind, what you said, Rachel, makes me feel a little better about having participated in this bizarre spectacle this morning. I also think that, like, I don't know, I do have kind of a theory about how to debate with people on the other side. And I think that, and I've been like kind of like working on this for a long time. And I think, you know, most people aren't like actively thinking about these things all the time the way that I do as a political podcasting weirdo. But like, I do have a strategy, you know, and like I think it is relatively effective. And I think that, like, you know, I don't know.
What is it?
Basically, I believe that if you want to change someone's mind, you can't. A lot of people kind of assume that debates take place in like a sort of idyllic, like academic environment where we've both agreed to meet in the middle and hear each other out completely. And that's not reality. And of course, like when Rachel's talking about people being more affirmed in their beliefs after a debate, a lot of times that's because they've just been like wailed on by somebody who doesn't like them. You know what I mean? And they.
It's not just that, though. It's also just literally being given any kind of information that challenges their beliefs at all, even if it's completely neutral.
Sure.
If it's just like numbers and no other like implications.
Sure. But a lot of times, I mean, like you'll see videos sometimes. I think like a really good example was there was that guy, I think his name is Brian Young, who interviewed Richard Spencer. And he was just like, wow, I just can't believe you said that. You're such a bigot. And that was like his response to everything. And that doesn't make you actually look good in a debate. Like that doesn't actually convey anything to anyone. You know what I mean? Like it might seem obvious to the people who feel the same as you, as you're saying this, that like, yeah, you're right, he's a bigot. But it doesn't, like the people who are kind of watching this from any kind of neutral perspective, they're seeing one guy argue his side and they're seeing the other guy just say, wow, you're a bigot. And like that doesn't sway the people who are currently undecided, first of all, and it certainly doesn't change the mind of the person that you're debating with or even make them take you seriously on any level, right? Like if you just approach it that way. And so, but that's a challenge, right? Because sometimes that is what you feel like you just want to say when you're dealing with somebody like, and especially some of like the Twitch commenters that we've had roll through here before and stuff. You just want to say, you're a fucking idiot. What are you talking about? But you have to like, if I actually want to have this be productive at all, I have to take this one step beyond just calling them a fucking idiot. And like, I don't know, that's a choice that is always hard to make for me sometimes. And I think a lot of people struggle with, and I like to kind of talk openly about, because I think a lot of people out there who watch this show or who are engaged with left-wing politics kind of run into these situations where they, you know, are looking at like, you know, do I call out my uncle at the family dinner, right? And like, do you? It's such a big question. I don't know. So I think to the point of like strategy, I think if you want to change people's minds, you have to meet them where they're at right now and not assume that they're going to come meet you anywhere. And so like, instead of like just telling someone, oh, that's false, you're stupid, and like using that as like the basis for how you like are like undermining what they say, no matter how false it is or it seems to be. Like my strategy when I debate with people on the other side of the fence is I try to meet them wherever they are first. Okay, this is what you believe. Why? Don't you think that this contradicts that? You know what I mean? And just like working from like the basis of just starting with wherever they're at and trying to like pull them closer to my position without assuming that they are going to naturally take one step towards me without me doing all the work, basically.
Yeah, well, and I think understanding that you're only going to move a person maybe a little bit in one conversation is very important. You know, changing a person's mind has to happen over years. It has to happen over an extended period of time. You cannot bring somebody to completely the other side of an argument in a day. It's just not how people learn or engage with new ideas. The other reason that it is very good to go ahead and debate if you're reasonably confident that you can make your side of the argument look good is because you empower people who agree with you with talking points. a lot of people know these things to be true, but haven't necessarily figured out how to tell somebody else these things are true. And so by having debates like you had this morning, you are giving people a script. And that can be incredibly helpful because then those people can move forward and continue having those conversations over and over again with people such that they actually eventually might have their minds changed.
Yeah, and honestly, that's part of what I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts specifically for that reason. It's like, oh, I'm interested in this. I know what I believe about it. I don't know how to explain it. I know these people are going to talk about it, so I listen to them talk about it, and I figure out better ways to communicate it to people so I can do it in under a couple minutes, because I don't know about anyone else, but I am not good at telling people things in under 1 minute, and that's very difficult.
Yeah.
I also think it's really interesting, the conversation that we're having, because a lot of this is like, I mean, it's a very interpersonal, one-on-one, debate-driven thing. It's very much within like the right-wing framing. Not saying that's what people are doing here necessarily, but like part of meeting, I think, right-wingers where they're at is debating them in that frame of debate in and of itself. Because like I'm fundamentally one of those people that believes that like it's our culture is downstream from the structures we live under and the politics that we deal with. So like if we gain power within this structure and change the laws and rules and systems people live under, it will be a lot easier to bring people to our side. But I think a lot of the debate over whether or not we should be debating right wingers is, do we accede entirely to their framework where politics comes out of culture? You change the culture, you get those liberals off television, out of the colleges, and all of a sudden, I mean, the colleges is different, that's actually a power thing, but that you win the culture war, you win the political war. So when we go to right wingers to do this kind of debate, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, let's actually talk like one-on-one cultural values, like let's do culture at each other and express those talking points and those things. And I think the fastest way to convince someone to your side is to just win power and say, give everyone Medicare for all. So even a fascist is like, well, I'm still a fascist, but I definitely want to give everyone healthcare regardless. And then eventually they'll probably drop that fascist label, because at some point there'll be enough things around them they like that are antithetical to fascism. And I don't think there's any inherent problem in debating right wingers, but that's where I get caught up on it. Is I'm not really interested in like doing the culture with them. I just want to see what we can do to take power so that we can give everyone stuff, including them. And then it's really easy to be like, well, look at the socialist thing we did.
Sure.
So I agree with you in as much as establishing socialist infrastructure is the most persuasive argument for socialism. Like giving it to people, showing them what life can be like when they don't have to worry about these basic needs, definitely is the most persuasive argument we have. But when you say like we just need to take the power, that's the big question, right? How do we take that power? And I don't know that by saying we need to take the power first, you're really answering the question, right? We have to have a strategy for, putting ourselves into power positions.
Right.
I think, when I say the most effective strategy for socialism is do socialism, I don't think we actually need the government to do that. I think we can just do socialism and people will get on board and start doing it with us because it works.
Sure. And I don't mean to say that, like, I mean, how we take power is an entirely separate discussion that I'm just kind of papering over in that. So like, no, I'm with you on that. And in order to take power, you do need some amount of people agreeing to either fight for it or vote for it or something, some actual structure that gets it there. And to your point, the talking points are definitely what gets us. Because I mean, what we're talking about right now is we're talking about discussions between two people who are like deeply invested in politics, whether that's like us doing a lot of podcasts and reading and thinking about this stuff versus like the people you're talking to who are, I don't want to say they're reading, but you know what I mean? They're engaged with their ideas insofar as they're at least willing to try and reinforce them where they can.
Sure.
And that's an entirely different set of people than the set of people we're talking about who we like convince to help get us in power, I think.
Well, yeah. I do think that like one of the reasons that I do sometimes like think that this stuff can be worth it, and like one of the things that kind of like I was like talking myself into like following through with this which again, I'm ultimately glad I did. But again, when I initially heard, oh, it's Italian neo-fascist that you're debating, I was like, do I actually want to do this? That sounds crazy. But one of the things that I think is true is that, like, I don't think that we can necessarily take power very quickly without convincing a lot more people, right? Not everybody's on our side yet, okay? And so when it comes down to like convincing people, sometimes it's easier to convince people like this guy I was talking to today that I have a point than it is to convince a comfortable neoliberal who does not believe that there are problems with the world. And that is one reason why I do sometimes believe in engaging with people on the right wing, is because this guy today that I was debating with, one thing you could definitely say about him is he agrees that our governments are failing us. He agrees that there's a lot of structural problems surrounding us. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of like being able to get him to see some of my viewpoints, we actually have a few foundational beliefs in common that I can use to get him to kind of look at things my way a little bit more. Whereas again, a comfortable neolib doesn't agree that the government is failing us, doesn't agree that there's systemic problems all around us. You know what I mean? And so like sometimes trying to like talk to that, it was funny. I was like thinking about debates I've had afterwards with like neoliberals that were significantly more conservative feeling than this guy, you know, because like, again, they don't see a problem. They don't see a issue with the structures that they're looking at. And so I think sometimes I almost find it easier in terms of like, if we have to convert people from these camps, no matter what, I think a lot of times the general perception of a lot of people is, well, it's easier to convert the neolibs. They're already kind of liberal. They believe in some tolerance and stuff like that. Like they have these kind of like on paper similarity values. And so you kind of assume that, well, it would be easier to sway, right? But like the reality doesn't always match up with that in my experience. And sometimes it's easier to like get these right wingers who, again, believe that things are wrong to kind of see, okay, well, if we both believe that things are wrong, let's talk about why things are wrong and how they could be fixed, and see if maybe I can convince you that some of the reasons why I think things are wrong and how I think they could be fixed could actually fit better into the way that you see the world than you think maybe. You know what I mean? I don't know.
No, I think that's true, right? Like people who are already of the opinion the status quo cannot continue, they at least are willing to hear out ideas for how to make things better. If people are just fundamentally in denial about things being broken, you know, you're not going to reach them because they don't agree that things need to change at all, let alone have an opinion on how we should change them.
Right. And one of the things that, how do I say this? Gather my thoughts. Sometimes it can feel really dangerous talking with sometimes I feel really dangerous talking with people who have that much more comfortable middle ground, let's keep things the status quo take, because like in some sense they can be more dangerous toward derailing any sort of leftist movement than a right winger, because at least a right winger right winging provides an enemy and a future that you can imagine that they want that is bad. Whereas like, you know, you look at like the FBI playbook on how to infiltrate and destroy spaces, it's not like convince everyone to be right wing, it's derail meetings, try to make things not change that much, promote incrementalism, just try to take the teeth out of everything and make meetings really, really slow and unproductive, and convince people that the more radical actions are less useful.
Yeah, well, it's like the entire like defund versus abolish the police like language debate, right? Like, do you say defund if you mean abolish, right? And I frankly think, hell no, you say abolish if you mean abolish. Like, defunding is one of the ways we do abolition of police officers, but like there's way more to it than just that. And if we lead with defund them, we're going to get a 15% pay cut and nothing else, you know, and it's going to have the cops still having all of the power they do, but now they're pissed.
Right. And it's like, and I love the way that like people try to make it like, oh no, let's just focus on one specific tool. It's like if right wingers, instead of chanting like build the wall, chanted like get a hammer. Like, sure, why? For what? Like,
Right.
what are you just gonna like? You're gonna take money away? Why? For what purpose?
Right.
And if you don't say what you mean, you're going to get negotiated into not actually doing anything.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
me too.
Yeah.
This
This is not a debate.
This is not, no.
This is a circle jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much more fun, more satisfying.
Important to have these.
We're in good company. Angela Davis is of the same opinion. You know, attempts to reform usually mean that broken institutions stay in power for longer or become more powerful. And that is why abolition is a preferable choice to reform, because when you talk about reform, you acknowledge or assume as a precondition that the thing you're trying to reform should exist at all.
Right. And I mean, I think it's funny because I say this a lot, but I really mean it. I don't think that people would accept this for things besides the government in general. When you talk about like things that people are unhappy with, they usually want them like replaced. They usually want them to work again right away. You know what I mean? Like you don't want like a long period of like, maybe it's fixed and maybe it's not, or, you know, like kind of like stuff like that. Like if you asked anybody, who's like having like a problem with their refrigerator, would you like someone to try to fix your refrigerator, or would you like a new one? Most people would say I would like a new one. My fridge isn't that good. I'm worried that even if it gets fixed, it's just going to have more problems again later. Like maybe it'll work for a year and then break again. I would rather have a new refrigerator, right? Like,
right.
Is that how y'all feel?
I mean, it depends, right? Is the new refrigerator as good as the old refrigerator? Like, am I jumping into something that is better? Maybe. Yeah. If it's exactly the same fridge but not broken, sure. Like,
Charlie, you're
muted. I got it.
There you go.
Yeah. Right. And then we're asking like structural questions like, why is it constantly easier to get a new refrigerator instead of get one fixed? Like, why is it harder to put one part into a fridge than it is to build a whole new one and ship it across the planet?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is true. And that is like its own really good. I mean, this is one of the problems that we're having with our system of government right now, is that this actually fundamentally gets at the core of like the issue with like real democracy versus like this sort of fake representative thing that we have. Is that if you had real democracy, you could literally use the power of your vote, if you want to call it that, or your voice, or whatever you want to call it, within that system to change anything that you didn't agree with, right? Like there would not be parts of the government that are sort of locked off to you in the way that it is now, where like you're only allowed to change certain things. It's kind of like you're playing a video game where you don't have access to like the source code, right? Which might be fine if it's just a video game that you just play for fun, but we should have access to the source code of our democracy. We should all have access to these things. There shouldn't be
our democracy should be open source.
Right.
And that's why everyone on the left uses PCs and everyone on the right uses the Xbox.
That's right.
Well, Brandon just said these people wanted to abolish the Department of Education 5 years ago. NPR, food stamps, energy department. And I agree. You know, they keep talking about wanting to cut programs and spend less money. But they never, ever want to talk about spending less money on violence. And I think it's because, you know, there is an essential presupposition among that culture of people that violence is the answer. That the only way people learn is pain and discomfort and through acts of violence.
It's not even just amongst those people, because I've heard a lot of people on like the relative American left, not necessarily real like leftists, you know, but like people on the relative American left say, don't you think that most of these rules and things exist for a reason, that they were established because something happened? No.
Yeah, but a lot of times,
what reason?
Some white guy with slaves thought it would be a good idea. Like,
yeah.
I mean, literally, a lot of our traffic laws. Literally, a lot of our traffic laws were written by the automotive industry. Period.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't written by people who were like, "Gee, People drive faster than this speed in these neighborhoods, and that causes more of these kinds of problems or things like that people tend to assume are no, it's these were invented by the automotive industry.
Right.
And yeah.
And you still have to like do legislative work to get a seatbelt in the car because for some reason that one's not the one we get.
No.
Right. See, when people talk about these rules arising out of like a need or like the ability to help someone, that's a perfect example. We can't get seatbelts regulated in a lot of places. We can't get the actual safety features regulated in a lot of places. You know, when people talk about, oh, these rules exist to keep people safe. No, they won't pass the rules that would keep people safe. But all these things that they've passed, like people tend to think of like jaywalking, and they think of it as like an exception, as like, oh, this is a really bad law. You know, if you understand the history of jaywalking anyway, so a lot of people don't, but if you understand the history of jaywalking, it was completely established as a racial thing and to just basically harass poor and minority people who like walk to work and things like that. And it had nothing to do with anything else. Okay. Jaywalking has nothing to do with safety, has nothing to do with anything else. All right. People tend to look at a law like that. They learn the history behind jaywalking, which go Google it if you don't know, because like you can Google that and in 5 seconds, you'll be like, oh God. They tend to look at that and they think that's the exception. No, that's how all the laws are, pretty much without exception. Like,
yeah. I mean, I don't have any disagreement. I agree with you there. You know, these laws are written by people who have something to gain.
Right. Well,
I want to bring up the historic example of the Ford Pinto. If y'all know what for people who don't know what a Ford Pinto was, it was a subcompact car released by Ford, I think in the 70s. Let me check. 1971 through 1980s when it came out. It had a graphite bumper right next to its gas tank. And so some things we know about gasoline in particular, it's flammable. And some things we know about graphite in particular is it makes sparks. And so they had this absolute catastrophe of a car that kept literally catching on fire and exploding when it got rear-ended because it was designed poorly. Ford knew about this. They knew it was a problem. They were getting sued for it. And instead of pulling the car, they kept making it because they crunched the numbers and figured out that the lawsuits were going to cost them less. So they were letting people get hurt and die because it was going to save them and give them better profits than if they took responsibility for their fucking mistakes. And these are the people who were writing legislation. Those people are the ones who are deciding what the law is going to be. And if you think for 1 second that those are the people who were writing laws with your best interests at heart, I got a fucking boat to sell you. Actually, I got a Pinto to sell you.
The other day on stream, Brandon mentioned the Cannonball Run, and our Zoomer hosts and producers were like, "What's a Cannonball Run?" So that joke is gonna keep coming back.
I'm a millennial, and I just missed out on that one, I guess.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, it's kind of an old reference even for our age, but Brandon's the oldest among us, so you know he kind of pulls these things out of the attic, like here we go.
That extra 3 years on us really gives him a unique perspective.
Well, don't worry, culture's over, so we don't have to keep up anymore.
Yay!
Cat time.
Cat. Oh, you have a black cat too.
That's right. Don't sit on my keyboard. You're gonna like end the
I'm
stream.
gonna get a big eye full of cat.
Here.
Anyway, on that delightful, we're at
cute.
40.
Instead of being a shit, be cute. Mm.
He's a good cat. Look, I love. Y'all have seen me cuddle my black cat on air myself. And that being said, we should probably start wrapping up.
We should wrap up here. Charlie Winters, thank you so much for joining us today on this lovely stream.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, always, anytime. We'll definitely have to have you on these more because it's always good. And thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in. We appreciate you. We are Not Safe for Wonks at NSF Wonks on Twitter, patreon.com/notsafe. We will have a podcast episode probably coming out today, hopefully, or maybe it'll come out tomorrow if I'm a little bit too shady. But there will be a podcast episode coming out with Aqua Walters. This is like a makeup episode, basically. Our original episode with Aqua got fucked up, and it was a very tragic situation, but Aqua is very cool. He came back, he recorded with us again. It was probably even better than the first time. We really got into it. So that's going to be coming out like tonight or tomorrow.
Mhm.
And we will be back with more streams next week, Monday to Friday at 4 Eastern. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.